The temperature gauge read 38 degrees Fahrenheit. In a converted storage room with concrete floors, an elderly woman in a floral dress held a shivering child against her chest. Their breath came out in white clouds. The child's lips had turned faintly blue. Outside the locked door, a woman in an orange designer coat stood with her arms crossed, her voice steady and cold. "You'll stay until you learn respect. This is where people like you belong." The lock clicked. Then, the crunch of tires on ice. A car door slamming in the driveway. Heavy footsteps approaching through corridors that had grown unfamiliar. The woman in orange turned sharply, her confident expression flickering. The footsteps stopped. A key turned in a lock that should never have been locked. The door opened. Lawrence Milford stood in the doorway, still in his business suit, briefcase in hand, ice melting on his shoulders. He didn't shout. He didn't move. He simply stared at the scene before him. His mother, his niece, the temperature gauge, the woman he'd married. And in that frozen silence, everything he thought he knew shattered like ice. In that silence, a marriage died, a truth emerged, and a family hung in the balance between survival and tragedy. Before we continue, tell us, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? If stories of justice, family, and redemption matter to you, if you believe that love means showing up when it counts, subscribe and stay with us. Because what you're about to witness is a journey from perfection to horror to redemption, and it starts with a family that looked flawless from the outside. From the outside, the Milford household looked like the American dream perfected. Lawrence Milford's name carried weight across Houston's energy sector as CEO of Milford Energy Solutions, one of the Southwest's most respected infrastructure firms. He was known for integrity, strategic vision, and a quiet determination to succeed without compromising his values even when competitors cut corners. Business journals featured him in cover stories about ethical leadership. Charitable organizations sought his board presence. Young executives studied his speeches at industry conferences. When Lawrence married Joyce Hamilton, the narrative practically wrote itself. She was sophisticated, commanding in corporate settings, stunning at galas and fundraisers. Her family's old Houston money and her own rising influence in philanthropy and social circles made them a power couple that turned heads at every event. Photos from their wedding, pristine arrangements, live orchestra, Houston's elite smiling beneath crystal chandeliers, circulated in society pages for months. Commentators called it a union of ambition and grace, new money meeting old prestige. Inside the gates of their River Oaks mansion, everything looked equally flawless. Designer furniture arranged with precision. Art carefully curated. The marble foyer always gleaming. Staff moved efficiently through their duties. Security systems blinked quietly from corners no one questioned. Fresh flowers appeared like clockwork. Every room photographed like a magazine spread. But there were two people in that house who did not belong to the picture Joyce had so carefully constructed. An elderly woman who had sacrificed everything to raise the man who now barely saw her. And a little girl who had lost her parents and was now losing something far more fundamental. Her belief that family meant safety. What Joyce saw as imperfections to be hidden, Lawrence had once called family. But as his world expanded, his vision narrowed. And in that blind spot, something monstrous had taken root. This is their story. Lawrence Milford learned about sacrifice before he learned to read. His earliest memories were of his mother Eleanor coming home after midnight, her uniform from the diner still smelling of grease and coffee, only to rise again at 5 to clean office buildings before the sun came up. His father had left when Lawrence was 3, vanished with a woman from his construction crew, and never looked back. Eleanor never spoke bitterly about it. She simply worked, and worked, and worked. She raised 2 boys in a 1-bedroom apartment where the heat sometimes didn't work and the neighbors' fights bled through thin walls. But inside that cramped space, Eleanor created something the cold world outside couldn't touch. She made sure her sons ate first, always. She checked their homework at kitchen tables cluttered with bills she'd figure out how to pay later. When Lawrence's shoes wore through, she walked 3 miles to work to save bus fare, so he could have new ones. When his older brother David wanted to play football, she took a 3rd job on weekends. "You're going to be something," she told Lawrence every night. Not a wish. A prophecy. "You're going to be more than this." And he was. Scholarships carried him through college. Ruthless focus and 18-hour days carried him through his first decade in the energy sector. By 35, Lawrence Milford had built Milford Energy Solutions from a consultancy operating out of a shared office space into a firm managing infrastructure projects across 3 states. By 40, his name appeared on the same lists as men who'd inherited their empires. He'd done it himself. Every contract, every deal, every victory earned. Then he met Joyce Hamilton at a fundraiser for the Houston Symphony, and suddenly the last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Joyce was everything Lawrence had never allowed himself to want. Elegant in a way that seemed effortless but cost thousands. Connected to families whose names appeared on museum wings and hospital pavilions. She moved through rooms like she owned them, and in Houston's social hierarchy, in many ways she did. Her father's oil fortune dated back 3 generations. Her mother sat on boards that decided which charities mattered and which didn't. When Joyce showed interest in the self-made energy CEO, with the compelling story and the intense eyes, Lawrence felt something he'd spent his whole life chasing: validation. Not just success, belonging. Their wedding made the society pages. The reception at River Oaks Country Club drew 500 guests, including 2 senators and Houston's mayor. Eleanor wore a dress Joyce had selected for her, smiling in photographs, while Joyce's mother made polite conversation that never quite met Eleanor's eyes. David stood as best man, his wife Rachel beaming beside their 7-year-old daughter Tina, who scattered rose petals down the aisle with serious concentration. 6 months later, David and Rachel's car was hit by a drunk driver on Highway 59. The impact killed them instantly. Eleanor was the one who answered the phone at 2 in the morning. She was the one who identified the bodies. And she was the one who held Tina in the hospital waiting room while the little girl screamed for her mother until her voice went hoarse. Lawrence made the funeral arrangements between conference calls. Joyce handled the reception with characteristic efficiency, her grief performance pitch-perfect for the cameras that always seemed to find her. But it was Eleanor who moved into Tina's childhood home for 3 weeks, sleeping in the guest room, making the girl eat, holding her through nightmares. When Eleanor called Lawrence to discuss Tina's future, his assistant put her through during a board meeting. He stepped into the hallway, already calculating. Foster care felt impossible. Extended family were scattered, unstable, or unwilling. Adoption would take months, maybe years, and Tina had already lost too much. "Bring her here," Lawrence said finally. "Both of you, until we figure something out." Joyce's smile when he told her could have frozen water. But her words were warm, sympathetic, perfect. "Of course, darling. Family first. We'll make it work." The River Oaks mansion had 12,000 square feet. Surely there was room. Eleanor and Tina moved in on a Sunday afternoon. Vincent, the estate manager Lawrence had hired on Joyce's recommendation, supervised the minimal luggage with barely concealed disdain. Maria, the young housekeeper whose quiet efficiency Lawrence barely noticed, carried Tina's stuffed rabbit upstairs with gentle hands. Joyce greeted them in the foyer with embraces that looked genuine in the hallway mirror. She showed Eleanor to a guest suite in the East Wing, commenting on the morning light, the comfortable mattress, the in-suite bathroom with heated floors. She knelt to Tina's level, her voice honey-sweet. "You're safe here, sweetheart. This is your home now." But Maria, arranging fresh towels in the bathroom, saw what the others missed. She saw how Joyce's smile dissolved the moment Lawrence turned away. She saw the flash of something cold and calculating in Joyce's eyes as she watched Eleanor unpack a photograph of David. And Eleanor, thanking Joyce with the humility of someone who'd spent her whole life grateful for scraps, noticed something too. Something she told herself she'd imagined. When Joyce smiled at her, her eyes remained utterly, terrifyingly empty. That night, after Lawrence left for a dinner meeting he couldn't cancel, Joyce stood in her dressing room, removing pearl earrings worth more than Eleanor's annual income had ever been. Vincent appeared in the doorway, waiting. "The arrangements are temporary," Joyce said to her reflection, not to him. Lawrence said so himself. She set down the earrings with careful precision. "We just need to make sure temporary doesn't become permanent." Vincent nodded slowly, understanding blooming. "Of course, Mrs. Milford. I'll make sure the household runs smoothly." "Yes," Joyce said, her smile finally reaching her eyes. Smoothly. In the East Wing, Eleanor tucked Tina into bed, singing the same lullaby she'd once sung to Lawrence and David. The little girl's eyes were wide in the darkness. "Aunt Eleanor," Tina whispered. "Is the pretty lady nice?" Eleanor hesitated, her hand stilling on Tina's hair. Every instinct she'd honed through decades of reading people, of surviving, screamed a warning. But this was Lawrence's home. Lawrence's wife. Lawrence's life. "Of course, sweetheart," Eleanor lied, and kissed her forehead. "Everyone here is nice." But that night, as the mansion settled into silence, the thermostat in the east wing dropped 3 degrees. Not enough to complain about. Not enough to even mention. Just enough to begin. The Abu Dhabi deal represented 18 months of negotiation and Lawrence's best chance at expanding Milford Energy Solutions into international markets. When his car pulled away from the mansion at 4 in the morning, Eleanor watched from the guest suite window, a familiar loneliness settling in her chest. She'd watched Lawrence leave her whole life. For school, for college, for business, always chasing something just beyond reach. She'd learned not to hold on too tight. She didn't see Joyce watching from her own window, phone in hand, already texting Vincent. By the time Eleanor came downstairs at 7, the house had changed. Printed notices appeared on nearly every surface. Laminated cards in silver frames, like the kind you'd see at expensive hotels. Household efficiency standards, the header read in elegant script. Breakfast, 6:30 to 7:30 a.m., main dining room. Lunch, 12 to 1 p.m., solarium. Dinner, 7 p.m. sharp, formal dining room. Personal spaces to be maintained according to household protocols. Questions? See estate manager. Eleanor found Joyce in the morning room, perfectly composed in a cream cashmere sweater, reviewing something on her tablet. "Good morning, Eleanor." Joyce's smile was bright, professional. "I hope you slept well. I've implemented some organizational systems. Lawrence has been after me to streamline things for months. With the household staff, it helps to have clear structure." "Of course," Eleanor said carefully. "I don't want to be any trouble." "No trouble at all." Joyce set down her tablet. "Actually, I've been thinking about your rooms. That guest suite is lovely, but it's quite far from the kitchen and the family areas. I'm moving you and Tina to the east corridor. Smaller, yes, but the morning light is spectacular, and you'll be closer to everything. More comfortable." The east corridor rooms had been staff quarters before Lawrence renovated. They were clean, functional, and exactly half the size of the guest suite. The windows faced the service entrance. There was no morning light. Eleanor understood what was happening. She'd spent 63 years understanding what was happening. The careful choreography of being unwanted, the polite vocabulary of displacement. She recognized every move because she'd experienced them in different forms her entire life. As the scholarship kid in schools full of wealthy children. As the cleaning woman in office buildings. As the mother-in-law from the wrong side of town. "That's very thoughtful," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "We'll move today. Vincent will help." Joyce's eyes flickered with something Eleanor couldn't quite name. Satisfaction, maybe. Or relief. "Oh, and I've adjusted the climate controls. Lawrence always keeps this house too warm. Wasteful, really, for an energy CEO's home. We should practice what we preach, don't you think? I've set your wing to 65 degrees. Very efficient. 65 degrees. Eleanor thought of Tina, who'd been cold since her parents died, who slept wrapped in her mother's bathrobe every night because it still smelled like Rachel's perfume. But what could she say? This wasn't her house. Joyce wasn't obligated to keep them comfortable. They were guests. Temporary guests. Very sensible, Eleanor managed. By afternoon, their belongings had been relocated to rooms that felt more like an afterthought than an accommodation. Tina stood in the doorway of her new bedroom, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes welling with tears she'd learned not to shed. "It's an adventure," Eleanor said brightly, the same lie she'd told her sons countless times when rent went up or hours got cut or the heat didn't work. "We're pioneers, exploring new territory." Tina nodded, but she'd stopped asking questions. 7 years old, and she was already learning what Eleanor had learned long ago. Sometimes you survive by making yourself smaller. That evening, Vincent appeared at their door at 6:45. "Dinner is served at 7, he said crisply. "However, Mrs. Milford prefers to dine in the formal room. She's arranged for you to take your meals in the breakfast nook. More intimate, she thought. Less overwhelming for the child." Translation, out of sight. Eleanor found the breakfast nook off the kitchen, A small table near the service entrance where staff normally ate. 2 plates waited, the food already cooling. It was good food, restaurant quality, but it sat in a space that made its message clear. You eat here, not there. Know your place. Maria brought them water, her eyes avoiding Eleanor's. When Eleanor smiled at her, trying to convey that it was okay, that she understood, Maria's hands trembled slightly. Mrs. Milford asks that we maintain professional boundaries, Vincent said from the doorway, his voice carrying a warning. Maria, the kitchen needs attending. Maria fled. Eleanor made Tina eat, though the child only picked at her food. When Eleanor helped clear their plates, Vincent blocked her path. Staff handles cleanup, he said. Mrs. Milford's instructions. That night, Lawrence called via video from his hotel in Abu Dhabi, 10 hours ahead, his face bright on the screen. Joyce positioned herself perfectly in frame, the grand staircase visible behind her, every inch the gracious wife managing an elegant home. Everything's wonderful, Joyce said when Lawrence asked. Eleanor and Tina are settling in beautifully. We moved them to cozier rooms. Eleanor specifically requested something more manageable. Didn't you, Eleanor? Eleanor had been summoned to stand just outside the camera frame. She could see Lawrence, but he could barely see her, just a shadow in the background. Yes, Eleanor said, her throat tight. Everything's fine, sweetheart. Mom sounds tired, Lawrence noted, concern flickering across his face. She's still adjusting, Joyce said smoothly. Grief is exhausting. I'm taking good care of her, darling. Don't worry about a thing. After the call ended, Eleanor found Tina in her new bedroom, wearing her coat over her pajamas. I'm cold, Aunt Eleanor, the little girl whispered. Eleanor pulled her close, feeling her shiver. The thermostat on the wall read 65 degrees, just as Joyce had promised. Efficient. Reasonable. Nothing anyone could complain about without seeming ungrateful. I know, baby, Eleanor murmured. I know. She found an extra blanket in the closet and wrapped them both in it, sitting on the edge of Tina's bed. Through the wall, she could hear Joyce's voice on another call, laughing about something. The sound was warm, animated, alive. In the east corridor, the temperature dropped another degree. And in that moment, Eleanor made a choice she would come to regret. She decided not to tell Lawrence. He was working so hard, doing so much, finally living the life he'd earned. What kind of mother would burden him with complaints about room temperatures and meal schedules when he was securing his company's future? What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Joyce was counting on exactly that silence. In her dressing room, Joyce reviewed the security camera footage from the east corridor, watching Eleanor wrap Tina in blankets, watching them huddle together for warmth. She smiled and adjusted the climate control on her phone. Tomorrow, she'd drop it to 63. After all, they hadn't complained yet. Joyce kept a leather journal in her desk drawer, the kind with gold-edged pages that looked like it might contain poetry or prayers. Instead, it documented something far more calculated. Day 4, Eleanor appeared confused about breakfast time, arrived at 8:15 instead of designated 7:30. Possible cognitive decline. Day 6, found wandering near master suite, claimed she was just looking. Boundary issues concerning. Day 8, Tina reports Eleanor forgot to pack her lunch again. 3rd time this week. Forgetfulness increasing. None of it was true. Eleanor had never forgotten anything. But truth was less important than narrative, and Joyce was constructing a story that would make sense when it needed to. The thermostat in the east corridor read 62 degrees now. Eleanor woke each morning with stiff joints, her arthritis flaring in the cold. Tina slept in 2 sweaters, her small body curled so tightly it looked like she was trying to disappear. On Tuesday, Tina came home from school and said nothing about lunch. On Wednesday, the same. On Thursday, Eleanor found her hiding a banana and crackers in her backpack after breakfast. Baby, why are you doing that? Eleanor asked gently. Tina's eyes filled with tears. I got hungry at school. My lunch wasn't in my bag again. Eleanor felt ice in her stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature. She'd packed that lunch herself the night before, labeled it, put it in the refrigerator exactly where Vincent had told her to. She'd watched Tina's backpack sitting on the mudroom bench that morning. Someone was taking the lunches out. It's okay, Eleanor said, kissing Tina's forehead. We'll make sure you have snacks from now on. Smart girl, thinking ahead. But her hands shook as she held the child. This wasn't disorganization. This was deliberate. The house continued to shrink around them. A velvet rope appeared across the entrance to the library. Restoration in progress. A small sign read, though no workers ever came. The morning room became off-limits when Joyce hosted her book club. The conservatory was closed for seasonal maintenance. Even the main living room was suddenly too formal for daily use. Eleanor and Tina found themselves confined to an increasingly smaller territory. Their bedrooms, the breakfast nook, a narrow hallway connecting them. Like animals in a pen that kept getting smaller. On Friday, Joyce hosted lunch for 6 women whose handbags cost more than Eleanor's first car. Vincent appeared at Eleanor's door that morning with another printed notice. Mrs. Milford requests that you and the child remain in your rooms during her gathering. Family privacy, you understand. Eleanor understood. She understood she was being erased. They spent 4 hours in those cold rooms while laughter drifted up from below, the warm scent of catered food mocking their isolation. Tina did homework at her small desk, wearing her winter coat, her breath occasionally visible in the air. That afternoon, Eleanor made a decision. She walked to the thermostat in the hallway and reached for the controls. I wouldn't do that. Vincent's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Eleanor's hand froze. It's very cold, Eleanor said quietly. Tina is a child. Surely 65 would be. Mrs. Milford has set the household standards. Vincent stepped closer, his presence menacing despite his professional tone. I'll need to report any unauthorized adjustments. Report to who? This is my son's house. Is it? Vincent's smile was thin, cruel. Mr. Milford is in Abu Dhabi. Mrs. Milford manages the household. Those are the parameters of my employment. Eleanor dropped her hand, defeated. Within an hour, Joyce appeared at her door, her expression a masterpiece of concerned disappointment. Eleanor, Joyce said softly, as if speaking to a confused child. Vincent tells me you tried to override the climate system. We have rules for a reason. Lawrence trusts me to maintain his home properly. Surely you can respect that. The child is cold, Eleanor said, fighting to keep her voice steady. The child is fine. You're being oversensitive. Joyce tilted her head, her eyes calculating. Is this about control, Eleanor? Are you having trouble adjusting to not being the woman of the house anymore? The cruelty of it took Eleanor's breath away. She'd never been the woman of any house. She'd cleaned other people's houses for decades. I just want Tina to be comfortable, Eleanor whispered. And I want you to trust my judgment. Joyce's voice hardened just slightly. I won't mention this to Lawrence. He has enough stress. But Eleanor, you need to understand your position here. This is temporary, remember? Don't make it more difficult than it needs to be. The threat hung in the air, unspoken but perfectly clear. Complain, and you'll be removed. Be grateful, or be gone. That evening, Maria found Tina in the breakfast nook, struggling with math homework while wearing her coat and gloves. The sight broke something in the young housekeeper's heart. She disappeared and returned with a thick fleece blanket from the linen closet. Here, Pequena, Maria whispered, wrapping it around Tina's shoulders. This will. What exactly is happening here? Vincent stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous. Maria's face went white. The child was cold, senor. I just thought. You're not paid to think. Vincent strode forward and yanked the blanket away from Tina. Mrs. Milford sets the household standards. If she wanted extra blankets distributed, she would have authorized them. But she's just a little girl, Maria pleaded, her voice breaking. And you're just staff. Easily replaced staff, might I add. Vincent's eyes were cold. Your family back in El Salvador, they depend on your income, don't they? It would be a shame if. I understand, Maria said quickly, tears streaming down her face. Perdón. I understand. She fled the room, leaving Tina sitting small and alone, the math homework forgotten. 2 days later, Lawrence returned home for 36 hours between Abu Dhabi and meetings in Dallas. Eleanor heard his car in the driveway and felt hope surge in her chest for the first time in weeks. But Joyce had choreographed everything. When Lawrence walked through the door, the house was warm again. The thermostat mysteriously reset to 72. Fresh flowers filled every room. Music played softly. Joyce greeted him in an embrace that looked like coming home, wearing the dress he'd once said was his favorite. Eleanor appeared from the east corridor, and Lawrence's smile faltered slightly. Mom, you look tired. She's still processing grief, darling. Joyce interjected smoothly, her arm around Lawrence's waist. I'm managing it. She has good days and difficult days. Today's been difficult. Eleanor opened her mouth to speak, to tell him everything, but Joyce's eyes met hers over Lawrence's shoulder. The look was a warning. Speak, and see what happens. I'm fine, sweetheart, Eleanor heard herself say. Just adjusting. That evening, Eleanor tried 3 times to get Lawrence alone. Each time, Joyce appeared with perfect timing. A question about dinner. A phone call he needed to take. A reminder about tomorrow's early flight. She moved like a chess player who'd anticipated every possible move. At midnight, Eleanor stood outside Lawrence's study, gathering courage. Through the door, she could hear his voice. She seems fragile, Lawrence said. Maybe we should get her evaluated? Joyce's voice was gentle, sad. I've been thinking the same thing. The confusion, the forgetfulness, the boundary issues. Darling, I hate to say this, but I'm worried it might be early dementia. We should consult with someone. For her own safety. Eleanor's hand froze on the doorknob. She's only 63, Lawrence said, but he sounded uncertain. Grief can accelerate cognitive decline, and she's been under enormous stress for years. I'm just trying to protect her. Protect all of us. Eleanor backed away from the door, her heart shattering. Joyce was building a cage made of lies, and Lawrence was handing her the keys. The next morning, Lawrence left before dawn. Eleanor woke to find the thermostat had dropped to 60 degrees. And on her door, a new notice, laminated and official. Resident behavioral concerns under observation. Household modifications in effect for safety protocols. In her bedroom, Joyce made a phone call to a private facility she'd been researching. A place for elderly people with cognitive issues who needed specialized care. Yes, she said into the phone, her voice honey-sweet. I'd like to inquire about memory care placement. For my husband's mother. It's becoming clear she can't safely live independently anymore. She smiled at her reflection as she spoke, already imagining the house without them. 2 problems, 1 solution. All she needed was a little more time, a little more cold, and a few more documented incidents. Eleanor's phone stopped working on a Tuesday. When she mentioned it to Joyce, the solution arrived within hours. A brand new smartphone in sleek packaging, set up and ready to use. Lawrence insisted, Joyce said warmly, placing it in Eleanor's hands. Your old one was practically antique. This one has everything, better camera, easier interface. I've already transferred all your contacts. What Joyce didn't mention was the monitoring software installed in the settings, or that she'd transferred contacts into categories she controlled. Eleanor's church friends, her former neighbors, the women she'd worked with for decades. Their numbers were there, but calls to them now went to a recording. This number is no longer in service. When Eleanor tried to call her friend Beatrice from Sunday school, the line went dead. When she tried Margaret, who'd been her neighbor for 15 years, nothing. She stared at the phone, confusion creeping in. Had she written the numbers down wrong? Everything okay, Eleanor? Joyce appeared in the doorway like she'd been waiting. My friends. I can't seem to reach anyone. Joyce's expression softened into concern. Oh, Eleanor. Honey, you've been a bit confused lately. Are you sure you're dialing correctly? Here, let me help. She took the phone, made a show of checking, then handed it back with a sympathetic smile. These things can be tricky at our age. Why don't you rest? I'll look into it later. Our age. Joyce was 42. Eleanor was 63. But the implication landed like a slap. You're old, you're confused, you can't manage simple technology. That night, Eleanor tried again to call Beatrice. This time, Joyce's voice came through the speaker, warm and friendly. Hi. You've reached Eleanor's family. She's resting right now, but I'll make sure she gets your message. God bless. Eleanor's hands started shaking. She hadn't recorded that message. She hadn't authorized Joyce to intercept her calls. She was vanishing, and no one outside these walls would even know to look for her. The temperature dropped to 58 degrees at night. Eleanor slept in 2 sweaters, thermal underwear, and socks, buried under every blanket she could find. Across the hall, Tina slept in her winter coat, her small body curled into itself, her lips sometimes pale in the morning light. Eleanor woke one night to use the bathroom and found Tina standing in the hallway, shivering so hard she could barely speak. I can't get warm, Aunt Eleanor, she whispered. I can't stop shaking. Eleanor pulled her into bed, wrapped them both in blankets, and held her until the shaking subsided. But Tina's skin felt cold to the touch, and Eleanor knew this wasn't just uncomfortable anymore. This was dangerous. Meals began arriving smaller, less frequent. Breakfast was often just toast and weak coffee. Lunch disappeared entirely some days. When Eleanor questioned it, Vincent appeared with a printed nutrition plan. Mrs. Milford consulted with a doctor about appropriate portions for someone your age and activity level, he said smoothly. You should be grateful she's looking after your health. What doctor? Eleanor demanded. I haven't seen any doctor. Vincent's smile was thin. Mrs. Milford handles all household health consultations. It's all documented, Eleanor. Perhaps your memory is. My memory is fine. But was it? Eleanor found herself second-guessing everything now. Had there been a doctor? Had she forgotten? The cold made it hard to think clearly. Hunger made it hard to focus. She'd wake up unsure what day it was, whether she'd eaten breakfast or just thought about eating breakfast. Joyce was making her doubt her own mind, and it was working. When Lawrence called from Dallas, Tina saw her chance. Joyce had Eleanor positioned perfectly in frame, looking calm and collected despite the 3 sweaters hidden under her cardigan. But Tina slipped into view, her face urgent. Uncle Lawrence, we're really cold and hungry and... The screen froze. Pixelated. Fragmented. Oh, this connection is terrible, Joyce said, her voice concerned but her eyes hard as diamonds. Lawrence, can you hear us? The signal's cutting out. Tina, what did you... Lawrence's voice broke into static. The call ended. When Lawrence called back 2 minutes later, Joyce answered alone. Sorry, darling. The Wi-Fi's been spotty. Eleanor and Tina went to rest. Tina had a bit of a tantrum, actually. She's been acting out lately. I think she's processing trauma in difficult ways. Eleanor listened from the hallway, Tina clutching her hand, both of them invisible, voiceless, erased. Vincent's transformation into Joyce's personal enforcer was complete. He began appearing at odd hours, watching them. When Eleanor tried to take extra food from the breakfast nook, he confiscated it. Unauthorized between-meal consumption disrupts household protocols. When Tina asked Maria for a glass of water, Vincent stepped between them. Staff are not personal servants. Self-sufficiency is important for the child's development. Maria's eyes met Eleanor's across the kitchen, filled with anguish and apology. She saw everything. Eleanor's hands trembling from cold and low blood sugar, Tina's hollowed cheeks, the way they both moved like ghosts through a house that was slowly killing them. But Maria had 3 younger siblings in El Salvador, depending on the money she sent home every month. Her sister needed medicine. Her brother needed school fees. Her mother was sick. I'm sorry, Maria whispered once when Vincent wasn't watching. I'm so sorry. It's okay, Mija, Eleanor said, though it wasn't. I understand. The accusation started small. A bracelet missing from Joyce's dresser. Eleanor, were you in my room? China broken in the formal dining room, they weren't allowed to enter. Tina, did you touch these? Both denied it. Both were met with Joyce's sad, knowing smile. I'm not angry, Joyce said gently. I'm concerned. These memory lapses, Eleanor. These behavioral issues with the child. It's becoming a pattern. She documented everything in her leather journal. Showed Lawrence photos of the broken china, though Eleanor had never seen it before. Played him recordings of confused phone calls Eleanor supposedly made. Recordings Eleanor didn't remember making because they'd been fabricated or edited or pulled from some context she couldn't recall. I'm worried about your mother's mental state, Joyce told Lawrence during a late-night call he took in his hotel room in Chicago. Eleanor knew because she'd picked up the extension in the hallway, her hands shaking, desperate to hear what Joyce was saying about her. Should we consider assistance? Professional care? There are wonderful facilities that specialize in early-stage dementia. She'd be safe, supervised, properly cared for. Eleanor's heart stopped. She pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from crying out. She's not that bad, Lawrence said, but he sounded uncertain. Is she? Darling, I'm trying to protect her. And protect Tina. This morning, Eleanor couldn't remember if she'd fed the child breakfast. I found Tina hiding food in her room. Hoarding behavior, the doctor said, often indicates neglect or confusion in the caregiver. All lies. All carefully constructed, documented, witnessed lies. Maybe you're right, Lawrence said finally. Maybe we should look into options. Eleanor hung up the phone with shaking hands and slid down the wall to the floor. In that moment, she understood the full scope of Joyce's plan. She wasn't just being made uncomfortable. She was being erased, diagnosed, institutionalized. And once Eleanor was gone, what would happen to Tina? That night, Eleanor held the little girl close in the freezing room and made a decision. Tomorrow, she'd find a way to contact someone. Anyone. She'd walk out the front door if she had to, take Tina to a neighbor, to a church, to a police station. But when morning came, she found the door to their corridor locked from the outside. Vincent's voice came through the intercom system, calm and professional. Mrs. Milford has implemented new safety protocols. For your protection, Eleanor. The door will open at designated times for meals and necessities. Please don't be alarmed. This is standard procedure for residents with cognitive concerns. Residents. Not family. Not guests. Residents. Eleanor pulled Tina close as the child began to cry. They were prisoners now, and no one was coming to save them. In her office, Joyce made another call to the memory care facility. Yes, I'd like to move forward with the evaluation. Her son has agreed it's necessary. How soon can you send someone? She paused, listening, then smiled. Friday? Perfect. That gives me 3 more days. 3 more days to make Eleanor look completely incompetent. 3 more days to make the child seem damaged beyond repair. 3 more days to seal them both away forever, leaving Joyce's perfect house finally, blissfully empty of complications. Lawrence's itinerary arrived via email. Dallas for 3 days, then Chicago for a week, then potentially Denver, depending on how negotiations went. 2 weeks minimum, possibly 3. Eleanor read it on the phone Joyce still allowed her to use under supervision, and felt something inside her collapse. 2 weeks. She wasn't sure they'd survive 2 weeks. The morning after Lawrence left, Vincent appeared at their door with moving boxes. Mrs. Milford has decided the East Corridor rooms are needed for upcoming renovations, he announced. You'll be relocating to the service quarters in the back wing. More appropriate for your situation. The service quarters, where maids had once lived in the 1920s when the house was first built. Rooms that had been renovated only in the sense that someone had painted the walls and installed a functioning toilet. Eleanor wanted to fight. Wanted to scream that this was her son's house, that she had rights, that a child shouldn't be housed like unwanted furniture. But the fight had been beaten out of her one cold day at a time, one missed meal at a time, one locked door at a time. Of course, she whispered. Whatever is best. The back wing was worse than she'd imagined. 2 small rooms that smelled of mildew and neglect. A single window that looked out onto the service alley where garbage trucks came every Tuesday. The radiator was old, painted over, and when Eleanor touched it, the metal was ice cold. The thermostat read 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Constant. Within 3 days, Eleanor developed a cough that rattled in her chest like stones. She tried to suppress it, knowing that weakness would be weaponized, but her body betrayed her. Each breath hurt. Each morning, she woke feeling like she'd aged 10 years overnight. I think I need to see a doctor, Eleanor said to Joyce during one of her brief, inspectional visits. Joyce's eyebrows rose. For a cold? Eleanor, you're being dramatic. Rest will help. I've had Vincent bring you extra tissues. It's not just a cold. My chest is fine. You've always been a bit of a hypochondriac, haven't you? Joyce's smile was kind, her words poison. Lawrence mentioned it once. How you'd worry over every little thing when he was a boy. I'm sure this is the same. Rest, fluids, you'll be fine. Eleanor had never been a hypochondriac. Lawrence had never said such a thing. But who would believe her now? Tina stopped speaking in full sentences. The vibrant 7-year-old who'd once chattered about school and friends and her favorite books now communicated in whispers, in single words, in silence. She did her homework without being asked, ate what little food she was given without complaint, and moved through the world like a shadow trying not to cast itself. One afternoon, Maria appeared with 2 cups of hot tea, her hands shaking as she set them down. Please, she whispered. It's not much, but what the hell do you think you're doing? Vincent filled the doorway, his face contorted with rage. Maria turned, tears already streaming down her face. They're cold, senor. The child is. The child is being taught discipline. As are you. He snatched the teacups away, the hot liquid sloshing onto the floor. Mrs. Milford has been extraordinarily patient with your insubordination, but this ends now. One more incident, and I'll personally ensure you're deported. Your visa, your work permit, your little sister's school fees, all of it gone. Do you understand me?" Maria's face crumpled. "Si, senor. I understand." She fled without looking at Eleanor, and Eleanor didn't blame her. What was one woman's conscience against 3 children's futures? After Maria left, Eleanor heard Vincent's voice in the hallway, talking to Joyce on his phone. "The staff issue is handled. Yes, complete compliance now. No, they won't cause any more trouble. They're barely functioning at this point." That night, Joyce sat in her home office, expensive wine in hand, and spoke to her reflection in the darkened window. "They're making Lawrence look weak," she said aloud, as if explaining herself to an invisible jury. "A man of his stature shouldn't have these complications. An elderly mother who can't care for herself? A damaged child with behavioral issues? It reflects poorly. On him. On us. On everything we've built." She took a sip of wine, her justification complete. In Joyce's mind, this wasn't cruelty. This was maintenance. Quality control. The removal of imperfections from an otherwise flawless life. Eleanor's phone was confiscated entirely now. "Too confusing for you," Joyce explained gently. "You kept trying to call numbers that don't exist. It's better this way. No phone. No visitors, though none had been allowed for weeks. No contact with anyone beyond these walls." Eleanor had been systematically deleted from the world, and the world had not noticed her absence. She apologized constantly now. For breathing too loudly. For coughing. For existing in spaces Joyce might walk through. "I'm sorry," became her reflexive response to everything. "I'm sorry," when Vincent brought their meager dinner. "I'm sorry," when she asked if Tina could have an extra blanket. "I'm sorry," when she dared to exist at all. Tina watched her grandmother shrink, and something broke inside the child. Adults were supposed to protect you, but Aunt Eleanor couldn't even protect herself. One night, in their freezing room, Tina's breath came out in visible clouds. She pulled her coat tighter and asked the question that had been building in her 7-year-old heart. "Grandma, does Uncle Lawrence know we're cold?" Eleanor's heart shattered. She thought of Lawrence in a warm hotel room, closing deals, building empires, trusting that the woman he'd married was caring for his family. She thought of all the times she'd protected him as a child, from the truth about how poor they were, from his father's abandonment, from her own exhaustion and fear. She was still protecting him now, even as it killed her. "He's working hard for us, sweetheart," Eleanor said, pulling Tina close. "We just need to be patient. He'll come home soon, and everything will be better." But Tina was young, not stupid. "Are you sure?" Eleanor held the child tighter, feeling her small body shiver, and told the biggest lie of her life. "I'm sure, baby. Uncle Lawrence loves us. He'd never let anything bad happen to us. Except he already had. Because he couldn't see. Because he didn't want to see. Because Joyce had built a wall of lies between them so thick that Lawrence's love, real though it was, couldn't penetrate it. This was the weight of invisible suffering. Love that existed but couldn't reach. Care that was real but rendered powerless by distance and deception. Lawrence loved them, and they were dying anyway. At 3 a.m., Eleanor's cough woke her again. Her chest felt tight, her breathing shallow. Across the room, Tina slept fitfully, whimpering in her dreams. Eleanor tried to stand, to check on her, but dizziness swept through her. She gripped the edge of the bed and waited for the room to stop spinning. In that moment, she realized with absolute clarity, they were running out of time. Her body was shutting down. Tina was withdrawing into herself in ways that might be permanent. Joyce's plan was working perfectly. And tomorrow, Joyce had an appointment scheduled. Eleanor had seen it on the calendar during one of her supervised walks to the bathroom. Memory care evaluation, 2 p.m., Dr. Hendricks. They were coming to assess her, to document her decline, to sign the papers that would move her into a facility where she'd die alone, and Tina would be. Where would Tina be? Eleanor's blood ran colder than the room. Joyce hadn't mentioned plans for Tina, hadn't talked about adoption or foster care or relatives. She'd only talked about getting Eleanor proper care. What happened to a 7-year-old orphan when her only advocate was declared incompetent and institutionalized? The answer hit Eleanor like a physical blow, whatever Joyce decided. She looked at Tina, sleeping in her winter coat, and made a choice. Tomorrow, when the doctor came, Eleanor would fight. She'd tell the truth, consequences be damned. She'd scream it if she had to. But she didn't know that tomorrow, Joyce had other plans. She didn't know about the storage room. She didn't know that the coldest night of their lives was about to begin. And she didn't know that Lawrence, in his Chicago hotel room, was about to make a decision that would change everything. A decision to come home early, just this once, because something he couldn't name kept telling him that something was terribly, desperately wrong. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this journey from horror to hope. Your engagement matters. It tells us these stories of justice and family resonate with you. Joyce's visits to the back wing became rituals of psychological dismantling. She arrived each morning at precisely 8 o'clock, dressed impeccably, her perfume filling the small room like an invasion. She never raised her voice. She never needed to. "You're ungrateful," Joyce said on Monday, standing in the doorway while Eleanor sat hunched on the edge of her bed, coughing into a tissue. "Lawrence has given you everything. This beautiful home, security, safety. And this is how you repay him? By making yourself sick? By forcing me to manage your decline." Eleanor opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. What was the point? Every word she spoke was twisted, documented, used as evidence of confusion or hostility. "You're taking advantage," Joyce continued on Tuesday, her eyes cold as she watched Tina huddle in the corner, trying to make herself invisible. "Of his kindness. His loyalty. He's too good to see it, but I see it. You and that child, draining his resources, his energy, his reputation." Eleanor stared at the floor and said nothing. Defending herself only made it worse. Silence was safer. "You're embarrassing Lawrence," Joyce concluded on Wednesday, leaning against the doorframe like she had all the time in the world. "Every day you're here, you diminish him. A successful man doesn't have family living like this. It makes people wonder about his judgment, about his strength. You're making him look weak." That one landed. Eleanor flinched, and Joyce saw it. Smiled. "But don't worry," Joyce said softly. "I'll fix it. I always fix Lawrence's problems." After that visit, Eleanor stopped defending herself entirely. She accepted every accusation, every insult, every redefinition of reality with a bowed head and silence. Tina watched her grandmother surrender, and something fundamental broke inside the child. She stopped crying, stopped reacting. Her face became a mask, her eyes empty. Vincent noticed it during one of his inspections and reported back to Joyce with satisfaction. "They're compliant now, completely subdued." Maria noticed it too, and it haunted her. She saw Eleanor's hands trembling as she tried to button her sweater. Saw Tina sitting motionless for hours, staring at nothing. But Vincent had made his threats clear, and Maria had seen him follow through before. A previous housekeeper had been fired and deported within 48 hours for stealing food that Vincent himself had planted in her bag. Maria avoided the back wing entirely now. It was easier than witnessing suffering she couldn't stop. The temperature dropped to 50 degrees. Eleanor's cough deepened into something wet and rattling that she recognized from working in hospitals during her cleaning jobs. Bronchitis, possibly pneumonia. Her chest burned with every breath. She tried to hide it, coughing into pillows, but her body was betraying her. Tina's lips showed a faint blue tinge in the mornings. Her fingernails too. Eleanor recognized the signs of prolonged cold exposure, of a small body that couldn't regulate its temperature anymore. She wrapped Tina in every piece of clothing they owned, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. On Friday evening, the mansion transformed. Joyce hosted her annual charity gala, an event that drew 200 of Houston's wealthiest residents. Valets parked cars along the circular drive. A string quartet played in the conservatory. Champagne flowed. Laughter echoed through marble halls. Vincent appeared at the back wing with a padlock. "Mrs. Milford's orders," he said flatly. "You're to remain in your rooms during the event. We can't have disruptions." "We won't disrupt anything," Eleanor said, her voice hoarse. "We'll stay quiet. Please don't lock." The door closed. The lock clicked. For 6 hours, Eleanor and Tina sat in their freezing room while life happened on the other side of the walls. They heard music, conversations, the clink of crystal glasses. They heard Joyce's laughter, bright and charming, the sound of a woman who had everything she wanted. They smelled catered food, roasted meat, fresh bread, chocolate desserts, scents that drifted through the ventilation system like torture. Tina pressed her hands against the wall, her eyes huge and hollow. Why can't we be where it's warm, Grandma? Eleanor had no answer. She pulled Tina close and held her, both of them shivering, listening to a party they were locked out of in every possible way. At 9 o'clock, Lawrence called. Eleanor heard Joyce's voice through the wall, bright and animated. Darling, how wonderful to hear from you. The gala? It's spectacular. Everyone's asking about you. Your mother? Oh, she's resting. She specifically asked not to be disturbed tonight. She said the noise would overwhelm her. Isn't that thoughtful? Even in her condition, she's thinking of others. Yes, I'm taking excellent care of them. Don't worry about a thing. Focus on your meetings. We're fine here. Perfect, actually. Eleanor closed her eyes and felt tears slip down her cheeks. Tina felt her grandmother shaking and held her tighter. It's okay, Grandma, the child whispered, comforting the adult because no adult was left to comfort her. It's okay. But it wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. The party ended after midnight. Eleanor heard guests leaving, cars starting, voices fading into the night. Then silence. Then footsteps. Joyce stood outside their locked door. Eleanor could see her shadow in the gap beneath it, could hear her breathing. You know, Joyce said softly, speaking to the door, I've tried to be patient. I've tried to manage this situation with grace. But you just won't disappear quietly, will you? You keep existing. Keep requiring attention. Keep complicating everything. Eleanor didn't respond. Couldn't respond. Fear had closed her throat. I was going to wait for the evaluation, Joyce continued. Let the doctor declare you incompetent, move you to a facility, let the state handle the child. Clean. Professional. But I think we're past that now. I think we need a more immediate solution. The shadow moved. Footsteps retreated. Eleanor heard Joyce's voice, distant now, talking to Vincent. The storage room. The one we just converted with the climate controls. It's ready? Yes, ma'am. Temperature can be set to whatever you specify. Door locks from the outside. Soundproof during the renovation. Perfect. Joyce's voice carried a smile. Absolutely perfect. Eleanor's blood turned to ice that had nothing to do with the temperature. She understood, in that moment, that Joyce had moved beyond psychological torture into something far darker. She pulled Tina closer, her mind racing. The door was locked from outside. The window was too small and too high. No phone. No way to call for help. Lawrence was in Chicago, unreachable, fed lies about their well-being. They were completely, utterly alone. In her office, Joyce pulled up the weather forecast on her computer. A winter storm was moving into Houston. Unusual, but not unheard of. Temperatures would drop into the 20s. Roads would ice over. Lawrence's flight tomorrow might be delayed, possibly canceled. She had a window of opportunity. 48 hours, maybe more. She opened the climate control app on her phone and scrolled to the storage room controls. Set the temperature to 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Lock the setting. Then she poured herself a glass of wine and toasted her reflection in the window. To solving problems, she said. Lawrence will thank me eventually. Once he realizes how much simpler life is without complications. In the back wing, Eleanor held Tina and whispered prayers she wasn't sure anyone was hearing. She thought about Lawrence as a little boy, how she'd protected him from everything. Hunger, cold, fear, disappointment. She'd failed to protect him from one thing, the woman who would destroy everyone he loved. And now, in the deepest irony of all, he couldn't protect her. Outside, the first cold front moved in. Temperature dropped. Wind picked up. Ice began forming on the mansion's windows. And Joyce, checking the storage room one last time. The concrete floor, the bare walls, the temperature gauge, the lock that would seal from outside, smiled and whispered. Tomorrow morning. Before dawn. No one will even know they're missing until it's too late. Morning arrived gray and cold. Eleanor woke to the sound of the lock turning, her heart already racing before her eyes opened. Joyce stood in the doorway with Vincent behind her, both wearing expressions of practiced concern. Good morning, Joyce said pleasantly. I have some news. We're doing emergency renovation work in this wing. Structural issues the inspector found. You'll need to relocate temporarily. Eleanor sat up slowly, every instinct screaming danger. Relocate where? Just for a few hours. There's a storage area that's been converted. Clean, dry, perfectly safe. Once the work is done, we'll move you back. Tina gripped Eleanor's hand, her small fingers ice cold. Eleanor wanted to refuse, to fight. But what power did she have? She was an elderly woman who couldn't even open her own door. A prisoner calling herself a guest. Of course, Eleanor heard herself say, "Whatever you think is best." The storage room was in the basement level, a space Eleanor hadn't known existed. As Vincent led them down a narrow staircase, the temperature dropped with each step. The room itself was perhaps 10 by 12 feet, concrete floors swept clean, metal shelving units removed, leaving brackets on the walls like scars. A single bulb hung from the ceiling. In the corner, a temperature control panel blinked with digital precision. It read 38 degrees Fahrenheit. "This can't be right," Eleanor said, her voice shaking. "Joyce, it's freezing down here." "It's climate controlled for storage purposes," Joyce said calmly, standing in the doorway while Vincent positioned himself to block any escape. "You'll be fine for a few hours. This is for your own good, Eleanor. You need to learn respect. You need to understand your place." The words landed like physical blows. Eleanor's legs went weak. "My place? Joyce, we're family." "You're a burden," Joyce said, her mask finally, completely dropping. "You've always been a burden. To Lawrence, to me, to this household. And that child is damaged goods, a constant reminder of tragedy and failure. I've been patient. I've tried to manage you quietly. But you refuse to simply disappear." "Please," Eleanor whispered. "Tina is just a little girl. Whatever you think I've done, she's innocent. She's a complication." Joyce stepped back. "You both are. And I'm done managing complications." The door closed. The lock engaged with a sound that echoed in the concrete space. Eleanor lunged forward and pounded once, twice, then stopped. Her hands hurt from the cold metal. Her breath came out in white clouds. No one was coming. They both knew it. Tina stood frozen in the center of the room, her eyes huge, her small body already shivering in her thin dress and coat. Eleanor crossed to her and wrapped her in her own cardigan, pulling the child close. "It's okay, baby," Eleanor lied. "It's okay." But it wasn't okay. The cold was immediate and brutal. Within minutes, Eleanor's fingers started going numb. Within 15 minutes, Tina was shaking so hard she couldn't speak. They sank to the concrete floor because there was nowhere else to go, Eleanor sitting with her back against the wall, Tina curled in her lap, both of them wrapped in whatever clothing they could layer. Time became meaningless in the cold. Minutes stretched into eternities. Hours felt like days. Eleanor couldn't tell if they'd been there for 30 minutes or 3 hours. The cold made thinking difficult, made time elastic and strange. Her mind began to drift. She thought about Lawrence as a baby, how she'd held him through winter nights in their unheated apartment, her body the only warmth he had. She thought about working 3 jobs so her boys could have coats and shoes and full bellies. She thought about every sacrifice she'd made gladly, joyfully, because that's what love was. Love was giving everything and calling it enough. "Grandma." Tina's voice was so small, so frightened. "I'm scared." Eleanor pulled her closer, her own body shaking now, her chest burning with each breath. "Uncle Lawrence will come," she said through chattering teeth. "He always comes. He'll find us." But would he? He was in Chicago. Joyce controlled all communication. The house staff were either complicit or terrified. They could die here, and Lawrence might not know for days. The hours stretched. 2, 4, 6. Eleanor felt her body's desperate responses to the cold. Violent shivering that she couldn't control. Confusion creeping in at the edges of her thoughts. Fatigue so profound she had to fight to keep her eyes open. She recognized these signs from health classes she'd taken decades ago while working at hospitals. Early-stage hypothermia. And Tina, so much smaller, so much more vulnerable. Her lips were pale now, her shivering becoming intermittent. When shivering stopped, Eleanor knew it meant the body was shutting down. "Stay awake, baby," Eleanor whispered, patting Tina's cheeks gently. "Keep talking to me. Tell me about school. About your friends." Tina tried, but her words came out slurred, confused. Upstairs, Maria had noticed their absence. She'd brought breakfast to the back wing and found the rooms empty, the door still locked from the outside. Fear gripped her heart. She found Vincent in the kitchen. "Where are they?" Maria demanded, her voice shaking. "The senora and the little girl. Where did they go?" Vincent's expression was stone. "Mrs. Milford is handling a family matter. It doesn't concern you." "Where are they?" Maria's voice rose. "Vincent, poor favor, that child." is no longer your concern. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. You have a choice, Maria. You can keep your job, support your family, and mind your own business. Or you can interfere, lose everything, and accomplish nothing. Because no one will believe you. No one will listen to you. You're just the help. Maria's eyes filled with tears. She's a baby. She's just a little baby. And you have 3 little siblings who need to eat. Choose. Maria backed away, her hand over her mouth, sobbing. She knew where they were. She'd seen Joyce checking the storage room yesterday. She knew, and she was choosing her own family over theirs. Perdoname, she whispered. Perdoname, Dios. Outside, the winter storm that meteorologists had predicted would miss Houston changed course. Cold air poured down from the north. Temperatures plummeted. Ice began forming on trees, power lines, roads. Joyce watched the weather report in her office, a glass of wine in hand, and smiled. Flight delays and cancellations expected throughout the region, the weatherman announced. If you don't need to travel, stay home. Lawrence's flight from Chicago wouldn't leave. Not tonight. Possibly not tomorrow. The storm had bought her exactly what she needed, time. She checked the storage room temperature on her phone. Still 38 degrees Fahrenheit. She checked the camera she'd had Vincent install that morning. Eleanor and Tina huddled on the concrete floor, barely moving now. Perfect. In another 12 hours, the tragic discovery would be made. An elderly woman with declining mental health had apparently wandered into the storage area with her granddaughter, somehow locked themselves in, and couldn't get out. By the time anyone found them, hypothermia would have done its work. Tragic. Unfortunate. Not Joyce's fault. She'd already practiced her devastated expression in the mirror. But what Joyce didn't know was that Lawrence, sitting in his Chicago hotel room watching the same weather report, had made a decision. Something felt wrong. Had felt wrong for weeks. He couldn't name it, couldn't explain it, but the feeling had been growing. He called Joyce. Got voicemail. He called the house line. No answer. He tried his mother's phone. The number was disconnected. The wrongness intensified into alarm. Lawrence opened his laptop and booked a seat on a private charter flight, the only plane willing to attempt the journey. It would cost $20,000 and fly straight into the storm. He didn't care. I'm coming home, he told his assistant. Cancel everything. I'm coming home now. The plane would land in Houston in 4 hours. In the storage room, Eleanor's arms were going numb. She couldn't feel Tina's weight anymore. Couldn't tell if the child was still breathing. Lawrence, she whispered into the cold. Please, please come. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor's faith that her son would save her began to crack like ice. The Chicago deal closed at 2 in the afternoon, 3 days ahead of schedule. Lawrence sat in the conference room while lawyers exchanged signatures and his team celebrated with champagne and felt absolutely nothing. No satisfaction. No relief. Just a gnawing sense that something, somewhere, was catastrophically wrong. He'd felt it building for days. A tightness in his chest when he woke up. A distraction during meetings. An inability to focus on anything except the feeling that he needed to be somewhere else. Needed to go home. Mr. Milford, this is extraordinary, his lead attorney said, raising a glass. We should celebrate. Dinner at Gibson's? Lawrence stood abruptly. I need to go home. Sir, we have the Denver meetings tomorrow. Cancel them. Lawrence was already pulling out his phone. Cancel everything. I'm leaving tonight. His assistant caught up with him in the hallway. Mr. Milford, there are no commercial flights. The storm. Then charter something. I don't care what it costs. She hesitated, seeing something in his face she'd never seen before. Fear. I'll make the calls. 2 hours later, Lawrence boarded a private charter, the only pilot willing to attempt the journey. The man was ex-military, confident, and calm. We'll have to skirt the storm's edge, he said as they taxied. It's going to be rough. You sure about this? Lawrence thought about his mother's voice on their last call, how thin it had sounded. How she'd said, everything's fine, with the same tone she'd used when they'd been evicted from their apartment when he was 8. How she'd said it when his father left. How she'd said it when she was working herself to death. Everything's fine was Eleanor's code for everything's falling apart. I'm sure, Lawrence said. Get me home. The flight was brutal. The small plane bucked and shuddered through turbulence, ice forming on the wings faster than the de-icing system could handle. Lawrence gripped the armrests and thought about all the nights he'd spent in hotels while his mother slept in that house with Joyce. All the times he'd accepted his wife's explanations without question. All the video calls where he'd seen but hadn't looked. The plane touched down at Houston's private terminal just after midnight. Ice covered everything. The city looked frozen, abandoned. Lawrence's hands shook as he gripped the wheel of his car, driving through streets slick with ice, past abandoned vehicles, through a landscape that looked apocalyptic. The mansion appeared through the storm like a ghost, dark except for one light, Joyce's bedroom window, glowing warm and safe. Lawrence pulled up to the front entrance and sat for a moment, his breath clouding in the cold car. Something was wrong with the house. He couldn't name what, but he'd built his career on trusting instinct, and every instinct was screaming. He entered through the front door as quietly as possible. The foyer was freezing. The heat seemed to be off, or turned down so low it made no difference. His breath came out in clouds. In his own house. In Houston. Something was profoundly wrong. Mr. Milford. Vincent appeared from the hallway like a conjured spirit, his face pale with shock. He was still dressed, despite the late hour. Like he'd been waiting for something. "We weren't expecting you," Vincent stammered. "Your flight, the storm. Where is my mother?" Lawrence's voice was calm, deadly calm. Vincent's expression flickered. "Mrs. Milford didn't mention. I believe she's resting. It's quite late." "Where is she?" The silence stretched. Vincent's hesitation lasted perhaps 3 seconds. 3 seconds too long. 3 seconds that told Lawrence everything he needed to know. "I'll get Mrs. Milford," Vincent said, turning. "Don't move." Lawrence's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than shouting. "I asked you a question. Where is my mother? Where is Tina?" They're in the back wing." "The renovations." "What renovations?" "I didn't authorize any renovations." Vincent's face went white. "Mrs. Milford said." And then Lawrence heard it. Faint. Distant. So quiet he almost missed it beneath the sound of ice hitting the windows. A child's cry. Not from the back wing. From somewhere else. Somewhere deeper. Lawrence moved before thinking, following the sound through corridors that had somehow become unfamiliar in his absence. Everything looked different. Colder. Wrong. Photos were missing from walls. Rooms he remembered as warm and welcoming felt institutional, hostile. The sound led him to a door he barely recognized. A basement access he'd forgotten existed, used for storage, for things that didn't matter. The door was locked. "Mr. Milford, please, let me explain," Vincent's voice behind him, desperate now. Lawrence pulled out his key ring. His hands were shaking so hard, he could barely fit the override key into the lock. The key he kept for emergencies. The key that opened every door in his house. The turn. The click. The door opened. Cold air rushed out, like an exhalation from a tomb. Lawrence's breath stopped. The stairs descended into darkness, but he could see light at the bottom. Could hear something that sounded like breathing. Labored. Struggling. He took the stairs 3 at a time. The storage room door stood before him, another lock. Another key. His hands found it. Turned it. Pushed the door open. And the world stopped. Eleanor sat on the concrete floor, her back against the wall, her lips faintly blue. Tina was curled in her lap, wrapped in a cardigan, so still she looked like a photograph. Both of them were shaking, violent, involuntary tremors. Both of them had their eyes closed. The temperature gauge on the wall read 38 degrees Fahrenheit. The room was a freezer, and his mother and niece were inside it. Lawrence stood in the doorway, briefcase still in his hand, ice melting on his shoulders, and couldn't breathe. Couldn't speak. Couldn't process what he was seeing. This was his house. His wife had done this. In his house. To his family. While he'd been closing deals and building empires, the woman he'd married had been killing the people who'd made him who he was. Behind him, footsteps. Joyce's voice, sleep-rough and confused. "Lawrence? Darling, what are you doing down here? When did you get?" She appeared in the doorway and stopped. Saw him. Saw them. Saw the temperature gauge. For one perfect moment, her mask slipped completely. Lawrence saw calculation flash across her face. Saw her decide how to play this. Saw the exact moment she chose her lie. "Oh my God," Joyce breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. "Lawrence, I can explain. She's been so confused lately. She must have wandered down here with Tina. I had no idea. Vincent, why didn't you tell me they were missing?" Vincent, standing behind Joyce, opened his mouth. Closed it. Lawrence looked at his wife. At the estate manager who'd locked this door. At his mother, barely conscious. At Tina, who hadn't opened her eyes. And in that moment, In that frozen, terrible, crystal-clear moment, Lawrence finally saw what he'd been refusing to see for months. He said nothing. Not a word. Not a sound. He simply walked past Joyce like she didn't exist, knelt on the frozen concrete, and gathered his mother and Tina into his arms. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open, confused, disoriented, then focused on his face. "Lawrence." Her voice was barely a whisper. "You came." "I'm here, Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm here now. I've got you." Tina stirred in his arms, her small body ice cold, her lips moving soundlessly. And Lawrence Milford, who'd built an empire on control and precision, who'd never lost his composure in the most critical negotiations, felt something inside him shatter completely. His mother was freezing to death. His niece might already be dying. And the woman standing behind him had done it deliberately. "Call 911, he said, his voice empty, hollow. "Now." "Lawrence, let me explain." "Call them. Now." The roar echoed in the concrete space. Joyce flinched, pulled out her phone with shaking hands. And as Lawrence held his family close, trying to warm them with his own body, trying to will them back from wherever the cold had taken them, one thought echoed through his mind. How long had they been down here? How close had he come to losing them forever? And what would he do to the woman who'd put them here? Lawrence carried Tina up the stairs first. She was so light, so terrifyingly cold, her small body limp in his arms. He didn't look at Joyce, didn't acknowledge her existence. Every second mattered now, and she no longer did. He laid Tina on the living room sofa and ran back down for Eleanor. His mother tried to stand, couldn't. Her legs wouldn't support her. Lawrence lifted her like she weighed nothing, the way she'd once carried him when he was sick, when they had no money for doctors, when her love was the only medicine they could afford. "I've got you, Mom," he whispered. "I've got you." Maria appeared from the kitchen, blankets in her arms, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, wrapping blankets around Eleanor and Tina with shaking hands. "I'm so sorry. I knew and I didn't. I should have." "It's okay," Eleanor whispered through chattering teeth. "You have family too. I understand." But Lawrence understood something else. His entire household had watched this happen, had participated, had chosen. He pulled out his phone with hands that wouldn't stop shaking and dialed 911. "2 cases of severe hypothermia," he said, his voice mechanical, clinical. "1 elderly female, 1 child, age 7. Intentional exposure to freezing temperatures for approximately 8 hours. Both semi-conscious. Send police with the ambulance." This is a crime scene. Behind him, Joyce's carefully constructed composure finally shattered. "Lawrence, you're overreacting. They're fine. Look, they're awake. This is all a misunderstanding. Your mother has been confused lately. I've been documenting it. Ask Vincent. Ask anyone. She wandered down there herself. I've been trying to protect you from having to see her decline." Lawrence turned slowly, looked at her, really looked at her. The woman he'd married, who he'd thought loved him, who he'd trusted with everything. "Stop talking," he said quietly. "But I can explain. They were disrespectful. They were taking advantage. They were making you look weak. A man of your stature can't have family living like." I said stop talking. Joyce kept going, her words tumbling out faster, more desperate. "I was protecting your reputation. I was protecting us. Everything I did was to maintain the life we've built. They were complications. They were. Get out of my house." The roar shook the windows. Joyce stumbled backward, her face going white. Vincent moved toward the door, trying to slip away in the chaos. "You." Lawrence's voice stopped him cold. "You stay exactly where you are? The police will want to talk to you." "Mr. Milford, I was just following Mrs. Milford's instructions. You locked them in a freezing room. You threatened staff who tried to help. You're an accomplice to attempted murder. Sit down and wait for the police." Vincent sat. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Lawrence knelt beside Eleanor and Tina, rubbing their hands gently. Not too fast, he remembered from first aid training. Warming too quickly could stop their hearts. Eleanor's eyes found his face. "You came," she whispered. "I told Tina you'd come. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have seen. I should have known. You're here now." Her hand, ice cold, touched his cheek. "That's all that matters." Paramedics flooded through the door 8 minutes later. They worked with efficient urgency, checking vitals, wrapping heating blankets, starting IVs. Lawrence heard fragments of their conversations. Core temperature 89 degrees. Cardiac arrhythmia. The child's worse. We need to move. Another 2, maybe 3 hours, and we'd be looking at fatalities. The child especially. And the elderly woman's heart. The words hit Lawrence like physical blows. 2 hours. 3 at most. He'd come home just in time to watch them die. We're taking them to Memorial, the lead paramedic said. You can ride with us. As they loaded Eleanor onto the gurney, police arrived. 2 officers, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. Joyce immediately switched tactics. Officers, thank God you're here. There's been a terrible accident. My husband's mother, she's been experiencing dementia, and she somehow got herself and the child locked in the storage area. We're devastated. I've been trying to get her proper care, but, ma'am, step outside please. The officer's voice was flat, professional. We'll need statements from everyone. At the hospital, doctors worked for hours. Lawrence sat in the waiting room, still wearing his coat, ice still melting in his hair, and stared at his hands. These were the hands that had signed contracts worth millions, that had built an empire, that had been too busy, too distracted, too blind to protect the people who actually mattered. At 4 a.m., a doctor appeared. They're stable, she said. Physically, they'll recover. We're warming them slowly, monitoring their hearts. They'll need to stay for observation, but barring complications, they'll survive. Lawrence's head dropped into his hands. However, the doctor continued carefully, the psychological trauma of prolonged cold exposure, especially for the child, that recovery will be longer. Harder. They'll need support. They'll have it, Lawrence said. Whatever they need. Whatever it takes. Back at the mansion, police arrested Joyce and Vincent. Joyce's final performance was spectacular, screaming, crying, blaming. You'll regret this, Lawrence. I made you respectable. I made you somebody. Without me, you're nothing. Lawrence watched from the hospital parking lot via the security footage his lawyer pulled up on a tablet. He'd seen enough. Without them, he said quietly to the screen, I'm nothing. I forgot that. I'll never forget again. The trials took months. Maria's testimony was devastating. She described every cruelty, every locked door, every denied meal. Security footage corroborated everything. Joyce's careful documentation of incidents worked against her. The storage room's temperature log showed exactly how long Eleanor and Tina had been trapped, exactly how cold it had been. Joyce and Vincent both faced attempted murder charges. Joyce was sentenced to 15 years. Vincent to 12. Lawrence took indefinite leave from Milford Energy Solutions. His board protested. He didn't care. 3 months later, Eleanor and Tina lived in a different house. Not the mansion. Lawrence had sold it immediately, couldn't stand to walk through those rooms. This house was smaller, warmer in every sense. No staff. No formality. Just family. Lawrence had moved in with them. The CEO who'd once worked 18-hour days now made breakfast every morning, walked Tina to therapy appointments, sat with his mother while she gardened in the small backyard. One evening, they sat together on the porch as the sun set. Tina was drawing with markers, and Lawrence noticed with profound relief that she was using bright colors again. Yellow, orange, red, colors that meant warmth, safety, life. Tina laughed at something in her drawing. A real laugh, the first Lawrence had heard in months, and Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She touched Lawrence's hand. You came, she said, the same words she'd said in that frozen room. I should have been there all along, Lawrence said. But I'm here now. I'm here. That's what matters, Eleanor said. Love isn't about being perfect. It's about coming back. About staying. Tina climbed into Lawrence's lap, showing him her drawing. It was their new house, with 3 stick figures standing in front. All of them smiling. All of them warm. That's us, she said. We're safe now. Right, Uncle Lawrence? Right? He said, holding her close. You're safe. Forever. In that frozen room, a family had nearly died. But from the cold, a truth had emerged. A truth Lawrence would carry for the rest of his life. That presence matters more than presence. That vigilance is a form of love. And that sometimes we must lose everything to remember what actually matters. Success means nothing if the people you love are suffering. Empire means nothing if your family is broken. And no amount of money, power, or prestige can substitute for simply being there. Lawrence had learned that lesson in the cruelest way possible. But he'd learned it. And he would never, ever forget. If this story moved you, if justice and family matter to you, if you believe that love means showing up, subscribe and stand with us. Because every day, in homes that look perfect from the outside, people are suffering in silence. Every day, families are breaking while everyone looks away. Let's not look away anymore. Let's be the ones who come home early. Let's be the ones who see. Let's be the ones who save each other. Drop a comment telling us what this story meant to you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the people who love you need your presence more than your presence. Don't wait until it's almost too late to realize what truly matters. Subscribe now and join a community that believes family, justice, and truth are worth fighting for.